Become a part of the Horton team. We're looking for welders, painters, assemblers, machine operators, cabinet makers, and other positions to build emergency vehicles that help save lives. Join us at our hiring event on Wednesday, January 18th from 2 to 5 p.m. at 3800 McDowell Road in Grove City. We offer a huge $1,500 sign-on bonus and great benefits such as 401k match, medical coverage starting day one, and much more. For more information on what Horton can do for you, visit careers.revgroup.com and search Grove City.
Welcome to episode 11 of your Missen The Point podcast, where we discuss the weird, the wonderful, and the downright bizarre aspects of life as we have conversations with people from all over the world. Today, I'm joined by a new friend, fellow co-host of Conspiracy Theatre 3000, and someone who isn't afraid to go deep on any given subject, sharing with his listeners hours upon hours of research. He's a staple in the podcasting community, an all-around good guy. Let us welcome Andy Rouse of the Deep Share podcast. Andy, welcome.
Dude, Drew, that was like the nicest intro I've ever heard. Thank you, man. I really appreciate being here. And I love that we're doing our show together with Bob. It's going to be awesome when everybody hears it.
Yeah, I think our first episode is going to make waves. That was just so fun for me. And I think that a lot of people enjoy it.
Yeah, man. It's just going to be so fun to just do that endlessly. And it'll give us a little break from the deep, dark conspiracy stuff that we usually get into, you know?
That's right. You got to pop your head out of the rabbit hole sometimes to get some air, don't you?
It's inevitable. Just like me, I took like 2 months off recently because I just needed I was still doing research, but I just needed a breather from the public facing side of it, you know?
Yeah. And I think that brings us to what our conversation is today. You were delving into a topic it's so in depth and so dynamic, changing and shifting on what people's understanding of history is that I could easily see myself just having to take some time off and step back and reevaluate things. So I brought you on today to talk about Bock Saga.
Yes, Bock Saga, otherwise known as the Rehumanizing mythology.
Right. Now, this is something that I have a surface level understanding of. I studied history in university and I have a love of history, so I research things myself. I'm a big fan of Robert Zeppe's works, Humanity with Amnesia, Gods with Amnesia, that type of work. So I definitely see, and I think a lot of people are at this point now where they know that, history is a lie, right? The greatest saying is history is written by the victors. But with Bock Saga, it goes that step further, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. That's a great way to start off too, because it's kind of like the Bock Saga, whether it's 100% absolutely true or it alludes to a lot of things and it has connections to a lot of things that are true. It paints a picture that basically says our hidden history is fake history, but I mean, that's also not even that far-fetched these days. Because like you were saying, I mean, we have so many different narratives, even in the alternative history arena, if you will, so it's like, we're kind of always sifting through like what really adds up and what doesn't. And it takes such a long time because there's so many different angles and perspectives and layers to everything in the past. And you always end up running into things that you didn't expect, or I don't know, just kind of break everything apart that you were, hoping to figure out or something, it's endless.
Yeah. And I think everyone kind of gets to the point where it's exciting looking down rabbit holes and looking at alternative history and finding out that history might be a lie. But eventually you black pill yourself in your own research and you think about the things you might follow, like Sitchinite people, where it's about Planet X and the Anunnaki. Eventually you get to a point where you start to question your own research and go, if mainstream history could be a lie, what's to stop everything I've researched from also being a lie?
Yeah, at least a good aspect of it. Especially when you get into the dynamics. Like, it's fun to be into alternative history and it's fun to be into conspiracy. And it's interesting to see that a lot of traditional people in those two categories not always cross over, at least from the alternative history side of things. It almost seems like there's a line that gets drawn in the sand often, or at least, in the past 20, 30 years, it seems that, I think it's probably a little bit of fear, or, I don't want to go too far, let's break a little bit of this system. Let's not go all the way because, I won't be taken seriously or something like that. There's probably a lot of reasons for it, but it seems like the alternative history side of things, we kind of have to look at controlled opposition, and that plays a big part of it. And also our poor understanding of ancient symbolism, because I think that even if the Bock Saga has, 30% of it to be true, it would of course be the root language that we'll get into and a lot of their symbolism and things like that. And the reason why it's intriguing is because we find so many other myths and folklore from the North, the Northern Hemisphere in general, that relate the same way, and it kind of fills in blanks that these other stories kind of leave up to mysticism. So in that regard, it's like we would hypothetically have to rethink all of the symbolism that we take as originating from, say, Sumer and all the Persian Gulf area, like those and the Semitic languages and everything that was going on there. We kind of consider the beginning of our religious mythology, and it goes back so much further than that, but it's so broken apart. And everybody's got a little piece, right? Graham Hancock seems to be doing incredible work on, exposing the idea of an Ice Age society, but that's pretty much it, right? And then you have others in the field that are also incredible, that are describing the cultures that we might suppose were this Ice Age group, right? But many of those people kind of go off in one direction or another. It's still mythology, or they take it to an alien area, which is fine. I used to do it all the time, and that was my thing. I'm part of the UFO community. I have been forever. I'm just kind of a little thorn in its side right now,
Yeah.
Because it's, to me, it's revealing more human history than anything else.
And that's the conflict and the challenge people either they face when they come across it themselves, or they back away and they go with what's comfortable. What I really like about Bock Saga, only delving my toes in the water so far, is that it hits a lot of key areas that I find really intriguing, specifically around language and how language is used over time as a form of telling stories orally, which for me, that links back so well to what Indigenous Australian history is all about. It's an oral language culture. For the mainstream, is the oldest continuous culture in the world. So if Bock Saga is doing the same thing, drawing on aspects of language code and phonetic language to use to tell its story, I think that's all the more intriguing and potentially gives it a lot more plausibility than a lot of people would give it credit for.
Yeah, well said, man. I totally agree. The idea, and I don't know too much about the Aboriginal culture in Australia, but at the same time, I can only imagine that they probably have spiritual myths that I could probably rope into the theories that I have, or the hypotheses that I have going on. Yeah, do they have myths of like star people or light beings or anything like that?
They do. There's bun bun lights, which are lights that are depicted, orbs in particular, that are seen around campsites and around people. There's what are seen as spirits, which on the cave art are depicted as what a stereotypical grey looks like, with the large almond-shaped eyes and big head. It's a lot of those tropes that you see across other cultures. Even though Australia is so far separated from the rest of the world, it still has a lot of elements which you could identify and really narrow down in what Northern Hemisphere mythology would be. Which is really an unpopular opinion or take on it, because it is such a protected and ancient culture here in Australia. To compare it to anything else is a bit taboo at the moment.
I can imagine. And likewise for everything, right? Comparative religion always gets a really bad rap, and the Catholics attack it. Everybody doesn't like their, you're taking people's toys away. And that sounds like degrading in a way, but it's not. It's just how we are as humans. Like we kind of, if a lot of the things that I have serious convictions on suddenly are just taken from me, it's tough, right? But at the same time, we have to we can't fall in love with the information we're given. We have to remain objective as much as we can. And that's why, like with the Bock Saga, especially, it's so controversial, and there's not much to go on, right? I mean, if you look deep enough, there's a lot to go on. But I mean, to explain it to an audience and convince someone or something, that's kind of not what the Bock Saga can do. It's more like there's some really intriguing aspects to it that will definitely catch people's ear, and they'll have to look in deeper themselves and see if they kind of have the broad understanding of history, maybe, or symbolism, or both, that they can at least see the strong connections that are being made. It takes a lot, and it takes a while too, but it intrigued me from day one with Atlantis.
There's some healthy skepticism I think you need to have going into anything. And if you were to just take Bock Saga on its face value, unfortunately, like you said, unless you dive into it deeply and really do the research and give it the due diligence, there's aspects of it which can deter people. And you find that in all kinds of topics in conspiracy theory. Flat Earth is a big one for
Flat Earth, I was thinking that.
Tartary is another one. But I think Bock Saga is starting to come into its own a little bit, especially when we see those elements of phonetic language and shared history. And it's kind of a quilt work, stitching different parts together and hopefully in that forming a broader picture, like a tapestry of what history could have been. But before we get too far ahead into it, you've got clearly more of an understanding than I do, and I've got a surface level understanding. But maybe our listeners haven't heard this before. This is going to be a hard one. I know it's easier said than done. But what is a short breakdown of what Bock Saga is?
And this is great. I love coming on other shows and doing this, even if people are trying to find Bock Saga stuff and they're hearing me do it over and over again. They're probably noticing that I'm starting to maybe get a little bit more cohesive with it. Maybe not. But to try to simplify it for people, I would say, so it's a Finnish story. It starts with one family, and it's all kind of held together by a sound system, which is referred to as the root language. And this Finnish story supposedly, literally, it puts the human race back millions of years. So you already have, you have to stretch your imagination already. You have to suspend disbelief from many layers of what we're told. Even in alternative history, you have to be like, well, wait a minute. So that right off the bat's pretty intense. It includes many, many, many of our current ideas about history that are not accepted, but kind of put together in a different way. So Atlantis is a big part of it, but it changes the idea of Atlantis completely, but at the same time keeps it the same. A lot of our typical mythology that we get out of European cultures is embedded in the Bock Saga. And it's easy to kind of think that someone could have made this all up and just connected what they knew about other religions. But the man who brought this to the world, Eeyore Bock, it would have taken him far longer to do that than I think he had time for with all the things that he was doing in his personal life. But see, I'm already kind of rambling into different areas of it. It's an alternative history.
It's so basically broad, isn't it? And I think the
story of the heathen people.
Yeah, the aspect of it, I think that is its greatest obstacle within the current world in which we live in, especially after a certain mustached artist from Austria, is that you discuss anything about a prehistorical Caucasoid people or a Proto-European or the buzzword Aryan, people instantly shut off. It becomes instantly a white supremacy angle, and people aren't willing to indulge it. But, white people have a history as well. No matter where it comes from, we need to understand what that is. And for the broadest context of the world, that's going to help the rest of humanity understand who we are.
Right. Yeah. I keep thinking of like different memes to make with like funny things about this, saying what a weird time in history to learn real history in regards to this, because the Bock Saga is not the only angle either. It's interesting that since I learned about the Bock Saga like a year and a half ago, so many other things are popping up that allude to the same thing, this origin in the North. And it goes into so many different things. I don't know, like how deep into the Bock Saga should we go? Like, because the root language itself would be like 3 hours to talk about itself. But
Well, how about we go down this route then? I've got a couple of questions that I haven't looked into it yet myself, but I thought I'd just pick your brain about it.
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Bring it on, man.
All right. So this one's a big one for me. With all the research I've done and the things that I've looked into and my just general knowledge and research, there was definitely different species of subhumans on the planet all at one point. Almost like a Lord of the Rings type of world where we had smaller, shorter people, larger people, what have you.
Yeah. According
to the mainstream scientific method, there were at least 12 different pre-hominid human beings living on Earth at any given time. That includes the Australopithecines, which were the more ape-like people. They made up the first 4, and the following numbers were what you would consider to be more modern humans. We had the Homo florensis, which is the small hobbit person, habilis, erectus, archaic, Cro-Magnon, and Homo sapien. The last 3 being probably the most modern human, air quotes, which I find really interesting because it's 12 different types of humans all at once. And the 12 number is quite relevant when you look into biblical scriptures as well as other historical mythologies. In the biblical text, there were 12 tribes of Israel, and we just happened to find 12 different subspecies of humans. What are your thoughts on that? Is there anything replicated or seen in Bock Saga along those lines? Oh, sorry, you there?
Oh, there you are.
There we go.
Yeah, I just thought everything froze.
I thought you were in a deep moment of thought there because you were staring at me.
Same with you. I was like, all right.
Is that replicated in Bock Saga at all? The idea of there being different humans all at once that aren't what are considered modern humans?
No, I haven't heard that out of any of the Bock Saga direct information. However, there is, of course, the very extremely controversial origin of humanity itself, which comes from a goat and an ape, which is very interesting. I have a weird theory about it, but I
now I have to hear it. You can't just say a goat and an ape and then just leave it. Tell me what your theory is.
Let me try to extrapolate this. The broader scale of the Bock Saga story is kind of relaying this cover-up of old history, of course, primarily by people that wanted the heathen and pagan cultures destroyed, and we know who they are. And we know that the Catholic Church was the one that came up with the Big Bang. You know, he was a priest or whatever, or a pope, right? I think
he was a Catholic, a bishop or a priest or something along those lines. Yeah,
it's all
his way of explaining the universe was
right. And it's just, so you look at evolution, you look at Darwin's theory, and it's always like incomplete, but it's really close. Like it's definitely not fact. It's still a theory. So people fucking still argue about it, but obviously something's going on with evolution. It makes sense that things evolve. Everything evolves and moves towards its final form, if you will. But at the same time, it's not complete, you know? And it's always curious that the goat is always the symbol for the heathen, the pagan culture, the
Baphomet,
right? And of course, it's turned satanic and Luciferian. And see, my take on it is that, you know, we know that the Catholic Church is extremely fucked up and shady, and we knew they took over the fucking world and destroyed everything and hijacked everything. Yet we, in the conspiracy community, we love to listen to them about paganism and heathenism as if it was actually evil, and the Catholic Church is telling the truth about it for some reason. And the goat's always that symbol. Meanwhile, maybe evolution itself is this Bock Saga idea or something like it, but they're repressing the goat side of it because that's what they've done for thousands of years, is repress all of this pagan symbolism or hijack it or retranslate it in their own way, religion it.
So let's step back a little bit. It's
sure
the goat and the ape, because it's
goat and ape.
It's a big concept to try and wrap your head around. Like a lot of people have toyed with the idea of humanity and pigs being linked because there's so many similarities between us. But a goat and an ape. Now, in this mythology or this story, is there a greater power that combined these two? like a creation side behind it. Who are the creators in this? Who's the creators behind this?
Creation. Yeah. So the creation behind it is Uden. The name is Uden. And Uden was the sun. But Uden was also, they would say, Uden is everything, like literally everything. He's the sun, he's in you, he's in everything. But so this source, of course, kind of basically beams down this root language, this primary language, into the first two humans that come out of these goat and ape combination, which are Frey and Freya. These are the first two humans born. And they're imbued with this natural language. That's how the Bock Saga describes it. And what's interesting to me is that anthropological evidence all over the place shows that early humans would follow animals constantly, not just to hunt them or forage from their feces or something like that, but also to copy their movements and to follow them when things got rough or seasons were changing, because the animals always knew instinctively where to go and how to live. And the thing is, when you get into astrotheology and you start to understand that a lot of the symbolism that we've come to understand over the past couple thousand years is actually like instructions on how to live properly throughout the year. In a way, that's kind of, to me, it seems like the primary language that is being imbued into them in a way is this understanding from their animal side, from that evolution that is partially real. You know, it's still where we came from. It's like we evolved from the animal kingdom. We are the animal kingdom, and it's just latent in us to understand the seasons and understand how to do everything. So yeah, if that made any sense.
Well, yeah, it does. I'm just making a few little light bulb connection moments.
Yeah, please.
This
is the type of conversation that always will branch off into many different areas.
a lot of language you just specified. Uden is quite clearly, you can see a nod towards Odin, but not just that. Obviously. I thought of Eden. Eden was everything for the first people. Freya and Freya, clearly Norse gods. But when we talk about it was two animals creating a human, if we look back at human evolution through the mainstream lens, modern day humans are not a simple Homo sapien. Homo sapiens are a combination of interbreeding and intermixing between different human species. And if you took a biblical lens on that, that's almost like the tribe of Dan laying with the animals of the field and creating the 13th tribe, or the people who aren't connected to God, because there are this combination of different creatures. So that's just jumping around my head as you were speaking. So we've got this idea that humans have been made by a copulation of ape and a goat, which then gave us Freya and Freya. Where does it go to beyond there? What does it say about we've got humanity is so broad and so diverse. How does it take into account the different races of humans? And I know this might be a bit controversial about it, but it's still a conversation we should have.
Yeah, let's go for it. Well, before we go there, take me back there if I get lost. But
sure.
First, I think it would be interesting to go into the place that they were supposedly born. It was a hole. It was a hole at the very top of the earth. And in this cosmology, in this mythology, this Wainamoinen mythology, the top of the earth, the North Pole, was hell. That was the name of it. And it was actually Helsinki. And this myth also proposes another big one to suspend disbelief, that a cataclysm happened after the paradise time, which lasted very long time. After the paradise time, this cataclysm tipped the earth like a pole shift of some kind, and Helsinki ends up where it is today. It's pretty wild that this hell, this hole where they were born, they referred to it as the whole E. And that gets into the root language aspect of it. The E is very important, which is actually a lowercase I. And I've looked into that too. And there's a lot of linguistic information regarding that. Even the letter A is representative of the I, as in one. and stuff like that. So it goes back to that. But yeah, see, I'm jumping all over the place.
That's okay.
Holy, right? The holy, we consider things holy. That's the kind of story this is, where as you go through it, your entire contemporary culture is going to be ripped out from under you and give you origins for words that honestly will pretty much blow your mind once you get into some of the etymology of it.
All right, I'm going to go back to the mainstream and tap into what you've just said. So the earth for the longest time was a paradise, right? Paradise being Eden.
Yeah, they call it the paradisette.
But if we go through the mainstream understanding what the earth has been like, Earth was a paradise for millions of years. Now, this was a time of dinosaurs. There were not polar ice caps at one point anywhere on the north or the south. The entire Earth was a paradise. Green, lush, supporting life. Supposedly, we were struck by a meteor, which wiped out the dinosaurs, which, in my thinking, could quite easily throw the tilt of the planet off and move its point. Not to mention our point and northern point on the planet, the magnetic poles, they do wobble and shift from time to time. So it's not completely dismissive to think that it was at one point in Helsinki.
Right. Yeah. See, like, that's the thing. Like, it takes a lot of suspension of disbelief, but then once you get into the nitty gritty of some of the scientific and geographic evidence that has been presented, like even primary evidence in anthropology and stuff like that, you start to go, wow, okay, there may be some weird connections to some of this stuff. And even, shout out to my buddy Narco Longo from Old World, Florida. He's presented a lot of information regarding Florida and the whole East Coast of America being connected to these European Atlanteans and everything. It's all kind of tied in. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, and I think the hardest part about Bock Saga is it spans over such a unbelievably long span of time that I don't think humans can fully comprehend, even if you studied it your lifetime. That amount of time and the changes through time, it's so hard to wrap your head around.
Nor can we really account for it, unfortunately. Like, that's the thing, Randall Carlson, Graham Hancock, all these guys. I mean, everybody stops at this. Who were they? That's all we really get in the mainstream. And I'm considering that mainstream at this point. I mean, for Christ's sake,
it's on Netflix.
It's everywhere. And which is also kind of concerning in a way, to some degree. And I said something recently to a friend, and I really hold true to this, that controlled opposition, I think, has more to do with subject matter than it does individuals. I really believe that. Take it for what you will, But I do think that regardless of who is saying it, I do think that's interesting what is getting out there and what's not being suppressed. I mean, Graham Hancock's getting attacked, sure, but by nobody we take seriously.
No,
we immediately say, well, where are they getting their money from? And like, what is that stake for them? And at the surface level, it's at least their reputation and career in history and stuff like that, at least on the surface. You don't even have to go into any clandestine shit to acknowledge that,
No, and it's important to remember that how many people are out there are controlled opposition, air quotes, but don't even realize they are. They could genuinely believe what they believe, and they've been fed information somewhere along the lines for a purpose. And unfortunately, for a lot of people out there who are giving us information, they may not know they're even being played or used.
Absolutely. And honestly, this is something to talk about, man, and it's nothing cruel or disheartening even, really, because there's so many of us that have our hearts and minds in the right place. And I love everyone that's kind of just staying on their toes and looking into things continuously and never really collapsing on any absolutes necessarily. I mean, I understand when you do, but like, it's good to just kind of constantly keep an open mind as these things evolve and change. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's reel it back in. I really want to see what Bock Saga has to say about how the Caucasoid people came into this world. Because if you go off the basis of out of Africa theory, you would surmise that everyone would be melanated. Even over so many hundreds of thousands of years in Europe, your skin wouldn't demelanate to that extent. So what's the idea behind that?
So the Bock Saga has it that at the beginning, in the paradise time, we were all black. So that satiates a huge amount of our alternative history and, counterculture. Like, yep, still there amongst this very white story. In the beginning, we were all black. We were all
still very
dark-skinned.
out of Africa, isn't it?
So we were all tropical as fuck. Like, that was the planet. And that's what you were saying before. This is a time period supposedly when the planet was tropical entirely and it was upright. So they were all living with the sun going around 365 and perfect sunlight and darkness equal. And they set it up as a caste system, and they had ring systems like concentric rings, like the Atlantis story, all over the world, supposedly. Northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, but still this one in the north, this hell, Udenma, is also what the area was called after Uden, like Uden's first place or something. That was still the All-Father. That was the All-Father of all fathers. But every ring system around the planet had these All-Fathers. It was all very fractal. And that kind of, don't let me get too sidetracked, but that goes into that animal mentality as well. But we can go down that path another time. So after this paradise time, there's this cataclysm, which they referred to as Ragnarok, which we know carries over into Norse mythology. It stays around as it all became Christianized and Catholicized. But this Ragnarok tips the earth and covers most of the planet, like 85% of the planet, in ice. And basically everyone's dead. Like,
which would happen if there was an asteroid strike and enough debris was thrown into the atmosphere. It would bring about a nuclear winter. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So when this happens, the story claims that, Helsinki ends up where it is today, and everything tips. Keep in mind, Antarctica in the beginning, in paradise time, would have been somewhere not at the pole or anything like that anyway. So when this happens, they claim that the Gulf Stream that comes up out of Mexico and goes all the way up into the Finnish coast and in the Gulf kept the area warm, and the water's warm and the air warm enough to keep it habitable. And that, they claim today that the temperatures and the climate was virtually pretty similar to what Helsinki's like today. During like the winter time. But so it kept them alive, and it kept hell from freezing over, which is another little pun that it's like, wait, what? Where does that term come from? It's like, when you say that expression, you're talking about something that would never happen, when hell freezes over. And of course, in this story, hell did not freeze over while the rest of the world suffered. So when this happened, they called this time period Altland Is, all land ice. And this is where supposedly we get Atlantis from. Now, I do believe that this makes sense because over time, this phonetic term just becomes a word instead of a phrase, because this was a phonetic language originally. So when this happens, the lower parts of the hemisphere that didn't get completely covered in ice were like still sort of thriving. According to the Bock Saga, there were still kingdoms that were, thriving where there wasn't ice, but they were so disconnected from this that they were cut off completely in hell. So this hell was a thriving place for thousands and thousands of years, supposedly through this ice age. And through that time period, they advanced, they made, extreme advancements, probably not only with technology, but also mostly with nature. We're thinking about a very nature-driven pagan culture. This is like supposedly the original pagan culture. So it's all natural sciences, I'm assuming. So you can imagine how advancements like that would be the magic that is constantly talked about when we get to all these gods descending from quote unquote heaven, which also back then, this hell meant home, complete, heaven. That's what this word supposedly means, according to Bock Saga. So isn't that a fucking huge, crazy claim?
This hell where these people were living during this cataclysm, You're talking about concentric circles. How many concentric circles were there? Because I'm making connections with the 7 layers of hell.
Oh, interesting. Well, I don't know how many concentric circles specifically, but I think honestly we could go towards the studies that people have done into Atlantis itself for that, because I think that's the cool thing about Bock Saga. It just frames things differently. It doesn't necessarily say that your research is full of shit. And I like that. And it kind of includes a wide breadth of information and category that we all kind of have our own niches for, and we all like. That it doesn't do away with them. It just kind of reframes them. Unfortunately, in a large number of cases, it reframes part of it in a way that people really don't like. You know, similar to when people that don't like any of this alternative stuff get talked to about it, they get aggressive. You know, when you try to take away the aliens and stuff, people get kind of mad.
It's because aliens are so fun, that's why.
But back to the white people. So just like Arctic fox and polar bears and things like that, they say that this massive time period of staying in the ice in this cutoff place surrounded by glaciers that were a mile high, they eventually became brighter skinned, basically, and their eyes became blue and green rather than darker. Everything, their hair became red or blonde. So this story exists saying that on its own. Meanwhile, we have so many connections to that description in our ancient lore from around the world talking about gods.
Yeah, the progenitors of a lot of the New World cultures are depicted as redheads with shining white skin and blue eyes or green eyes. Mesoamerica's massive for it. Easter Island. A lot of what you would call First Nations people have those gods within their lexicon and their knowledge base.
The shiny ones.
Mm-hmm. And if anyone's ever seen me topless at the beach, I am a shiny one.
Yeah. So that's the thing, you know. But yeah, so that's their explanation for white folks, basically. And it's great because if we could progress with that, we can get to more of the other myths that it aligns with too, like the Nephilim and all these things. So the Nephilim story to me is like Romeo and Juliet. And so is this. It's this forbidden love between the North and the South. And it inevitably happens when the Ice Age, this Atlantis period starts to fade away. When the ice begins to move and melt, first it causes destruction, which is included in the Atlantis story, right? It's destroyed one way or the other in the Atlantis stories we hear. This one is a description that says like a time where the ice was scraping the crust of the earth, and eventually it scraped and destroyed Udenma. So while this happened, they had to bust through and, you know, into areas that were already melted away, and they were starting to be able to leave this cutoff area of Udenma and hell. And this is where we start to get, you know, our flood myths eventually, and our, like, you know, the progenitors kind of coming down and giving mathematics and all these different cultural
agriculture and all those types of things. This is very
husbandry.
Yeah, very much a Graham Hancock approach, where the more advanced or more sophisticated people were forced out of their own homeland, scattered across the world, and wherever they landed, they tried to put down roots and tried to bring up the people that were there when they arrived.
And it's you know, it all seems pretty wild, but until you get into the nitty gritty of it, you know, that's why I want to expose as many people to it as I can, because I think the more people we talk to about this, the more we can kind of root out what's what and what doesn't need to be in play anymore. You know, we got to put it all on the table here, because I think there's a constant theme in our community that is the powers that be want to make sure we don't know our own power. And what the Bock Saga has done to my brain, whether it's a good thing or not, it's taken my toys away too, you know, because I look at it now like, well, what a better way to take our power away right from the very beginning. We already admit that we're orphans and we're forced to not know who the hell we are. We're a species with amnesia. Yeah. So give it away. Give it away to aliens, give it away to fairies, give it away to elves, give it away to all these other things that brought the magic to the world and have the magic and have the power and all that kind of thing. The angels, the gods. And I know this sounds drastic, and there's a lot of nuance to this because I also am an avid and longtime user of psychedelic drugs and meditation and things like that. And I am very, very aware and open to mystical experiences of entities and things like that. And I'm not taking any of those toys from anybody. And I'm keep in mind too, there is nuance to this where we can get into it if you want, but I'm sure you've got a lot of great questions so far. So I want to stick with what you got already, but we can go down this path if you want, where we kind of expose how and why in different places we can kind of prove that these were humans. These are all humans, and it's loosely connected to the saga, but the saga just acts as kind of like a keystone for it. You know, it's like, it's a gateway to see a gateway back to humanity. I've been saying rehumanizing antiquity.
Absolutely. And this is the part that I struggle with. And it's definitely that take away the toys kind of bit, because you can't help feel like you're connected to things. And like you said, people have these interactions. People claim that they've seen aliens, say that they've seen fairies, have seen trolls, all these things throughout the span of history and time. And it can be quite confronting if you try to say that or suggest that these were people. And my head's wrapping around the idea that, you know, it's either two possibilities, or three possibilities. They are these spiritual, otherworldly entities. That's just the way it is. They were just humans. Or it's a possibility that maybe they could link back to those 12 different types of humans. Because if you've got 12 different types of humans, all with their own physical traits, Neanderthals could be quite easily construed as trolls or ogres. Homo florensis is quite easily a little person, a dwarf, a gnome. Fairies, the fae. That's a physical way of looking at it, but there's also the idea that if these Utenman people, these people that came from the north, they were so advanced and sophisticated and connected to nature, what's to say that when they pass, they don't come back and present themselves in different ways and encounter humanity? I'm just thinking about, like, when people think about encounters with angels, you see those connections with UFO experiences, with seeing loved ones that have passed. What's to say that these super advanced, knowledgeable people aren't coming back in the forms of pixies and fairies and things along those lines?
Well, that's an interesting take. I like that. And I'm really open-minded to where we go from it. I'm just kind of presenting what I find about these words, mostly in history, and then where can we take it from here? And like you said, the taking away the toys thing, where I have toys too. I have all these experiences too, you know, and I think the where it lies is the language. And my God, man, you can take it back to the damn language every time. You know, the Tower of Babel, right? I mean, it's always in the confusing of tongues, right? So what have they done? They've hijacked, like they always do. They've hijacked the most important experiences we can have, those that are going to link us back to nature, to the idea of connectedness, like no separation. The fact that, like, we look at all these things as exterior. We look at all these things as outside of ourselves. Not that it's all in our heads, but that it's something that's not part of us, right? Because we don't see this world as ourselves, as all of each other, as this whole experience itself. I mean, this is getting real psychedelic, but you can't not go down this kind of spiritual talk if you're going to talk about how this language has been kind of trapped us, where we go back and we look at our history and they've framed it. And I've been able to point to, like, a decent amount of times, like, where it started to happen, where they started to frame these things in a more mystical way on purpose. And my suggestion is to take away from what that experience that we all are connected to really is. because it would mean that we're all one. And we know that that's a constant theme. If we ever realize they are fucked, and like, well, who's fucked? No one's fucked.
Can I throw a few little things at you to see if you make some connections?
Yes.
Now, this is just my love of my own family history of being someone who's Scottish and Danish in descent, that if you look at when the Roman Empire entered Britain, the primary tribes were the Picts and the Celts and along those lines. The Picts in particular, if we look at the Picts, thinking about a race of people who are living in nature, off the land, grazing, not necessarily farming so much, you would think naturally they would have a smaller stature. Not tiny little pixies, but maybe average person's height, shorter than that. Maybe 4'5", something like that. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
They also had an affinity for woad paint, which is a blue tattoo. They'd either tattoo it on their skin or cover themselves in blue paint. Ironically, a lot of gods we see, particularly in the subcontinent of India, are depicted with blue skin. If you're a Roman soldier who's a newer culture, and you come across these shorter people who are painted living in the forest, hiding, they would seem quite mystical. And there's a very easy jump from Pict to pixie in the lexicon of vocabulary.
Oh, it gets closer. Because in Cornwall, England, they were known as the Pict-Sidhe. Pict-Sidhe. The Pict-Sidhe. And you know what they did? They held round table courts. Round table courts.
Very Arthurian.
So these were the fairy circles because these were the fair folk. Yeah, we have Fae, F-A-E, but this A-E, that combination of the A and the E together, that goes back to Aesir. And Aesir is the name of the people that lived in hell.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
In the Norse, it's there that they are the godlike people, the Aesir.
Right. Oh, yeah. And that's the interesting part. The Aesir and Vanir people are technically in Norse mythology, but they immortalize them. They turn them into gods and stuff like that. Meanwhile, the Aesir lived in hell, and the Vanir, which meant the one people, lived outside of hell. And there was the root language and the Von language. And supposedly the combination of the two is English. And what's crazy is my co-host on Roots of Creation, Jokke Hagström, who's from Sweden, has done extensive research on this for years and years. And he was close with Jim Chesner and had hours and hours and has them all recorded of conversations about these topics. He has both these languages in his head. He has the Finnish language and the Swedish language in him. And he says that that's the real key, that really the people that have those two languages fluently in their heads, it's going to connect. The root language connects in a way that it's undeniable. And I've met people through him that have said the same thing because of those two that language combination.
Oh no, we lost him again.
And I recently had, well, not recently, but I sort of recently had a friend on from, there
we go, we're back.
You got me?
Yep.
Shit.
That's okay.
Where did I trail off? You
were just talking about how there's the two different languages within the mind at the same time.
Oh,
and if you've got those concepts
with my buddy, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's basically what I was saying. Yeah. So pretty much that combination, like a spark goes off, and it's the understanding the Bock Saga's root language becomes like undeniable.
So is it alluding to that the root language is English or something close to English?
The root maybe I cut off the root language and the Von language. The one, so I let me start a little bit over just because I'm not sure where we got cut off. But so in hell there was the root language, which was spoken by the Aesir people, and then outside of that holy place, the holy. Outside of that place was the Von people that spoke the Von language, and supposedly the Von language and the root language are like basically what brought about the Germanic language that led to English. And that's why we have so many double meanings and it feels like English is coded and stuff like that. There's a lot of interesting connections there, but my co-host Jokke on Roots of Creation has Finnish and Swedish in his head. And he says that that's the combination. He says that that is the key to really making the Bock Saga, spark in your head and go, oh my God, it's undeniable.
Right. Interesting.
That's pretty crazy.
Now, in my understanding of Bock Saga, that it was, you'll have to tell me exactly who it is because I've only looked at this at a surface level. There was a king and he had two sons, and the two sons went off and created different kingdoms.
Oh, it's like my favorite part.
Now, I'm really interested about this one because I'd like to know which of my ancestries line up or if I'm a mixture of the two. So I'm half Scottish and half Danish. Where does that link up to?
I can't answer that directly, but if you want, I can pull up a clip that I could share screen with you.
Yeah,
and we
good.
can listen to the audio of Jim Chesner talking about it. It's a little bit probably a little long, but it's really awesome. But okay. Shit, I lost where we were. What am I answering?
It's the story of the king in Bock Saga whose sons went off and created different kingdoms or different peoples.
So this is wild. This is so cool. And it's so phonetic and it's so weird. But supposedly these two sons from the Aesir during Atlantis wanted to break away. They were the 13th and 14th sons. And this system was very rigorous about conception and reproduction. And it was basically that in paradise time, everything was all in balance, the way they had society structured and how we reproduce and everything, to the point where we were never out of balance in population with nature. It wasn't like it is now where we're trying to fucking kill everybody or anything. We were just another species living on the earth with nature in harmony. So these guys in this system didn't fit because the 12 kids had their roles, but these two extra kids during this time period didn't have any roles, but they wanted to be kings. So they called themselves the Wee Kings, the V Kings. So that's where you get Viking from, supposedly. And these two kings, Dan and Sven, go set out in two different directions. Dan makes the mark of Dan in Denmark. Gets Denmark, and Sven goes to Uppsala and creates Sweden. And that's the story supposedly of how Sweden and Denmark came to be. And Jim Chesner, the late Jim Chesner, who was very close with Eeyore Bock, goes into great detail of which white people came from which place originally. And it's pretty cool. If you want, I can pull it up. It may take me a second to find, but
yeah, no worries. Cool. While you're finding that, I'm just making connections with, you look at biblical scripture, there's a line of two sons that created two different parts of humanity. Tribe of Dan comes up. So Denmark, tribe of Dan. You're seeing those elements really come across in different aspects of culture and faith, aren't you?
Yeah, man, it's unbelievable where it takes me because I'm Irish and I love Irish folklore and history, and I've been to Ireland and I've walked on Giant's Causeway, and it's just amazing. And right under my nose, the Bock Saga takes me into back into my Irish folklore love, and I'm like, oh my God, look at all this information. It's unbelievable. We have the Tuatha De Danann, and this is supposedly the people or tribe or children of Danu, this goddess Danu. However, Danu is like the least spoken about goddess in Irish folklore. You can't really find much information about her. And it's interesting. There's many people that hypothesize that it's not even Danu. That name represents another goddess. But really, I mean, it's interesting that you have that Dan name in there, and then you have the Danube River, and these stories link all these areas together. It's unbelievable. And the Tuatha De Danann were, of course, these great white light beings that showed up on the shores of Ireland, and they came of bright flames in the sky. Meanwhile, it was common practice amongst like the Picts and the invading, I can't remember some of their names, the Milesians, to burn their ships and basically to just deter cowards from turning back from battle and shit like that. Once they got there, they were there until they could build more ships. These were the sea people. And of course, we know how prominent this seafaring culture is when you start getting into the nitty gritty behind the mythology and where all these characters come from, like Ea and Enki and all.
Especially when you talk about the Phoenicians and how aligned that is to phonetics.
Exactly, man. I mean, it's glaringly staring us in the face at that level. And the Phoenicians, that's where my boy Narco Longo takes us. It all comes from like this Phoenician language and all these Phoenician people. It's unreal, man. Interestingly enough, side note, I recently got Chat GPT to like contradict itself and have to like apologize to me about where certain words came from. I asked it where the origins for angel and angle were and if there was any connections. And it's immediately said there was no connections, and that it showed me a Greek origin for angle, I believe, and a Semitic origin for angel. And then I said, but the Phoenicians had concepts in their language that relate to these before any of these languages existed. And it was like, yes, the Phoenicians. And it went on and on about the Phoenicians. And at the end it said, it is understood that the words angel and angle come from the Phoenician alphabet. And I'm like, well, you just contradicted yourself. And it asked me to point out where it contradicted itself. And I told it. Because, oh yes, I forgot that it told me, of course, that everything came from Latin. These two, the Semitic and Greek, obviously were rooted in Latin and stuff like that. And it had to take that back and say they came from the Phoenician alphabet. Sorry for that gobbledygook.
Okay.
But
now, to play devil's advocate on that, and I think we have to do that at times.
Oh, absolutely.
I've often thought about language like this because I've been delving really deeply into the phonetics of language and how we decode the English language in particular and why it's so difficult to learn compared to other languages.
Yeah.
That it's a lot like language is a lot like music. That a lot of songs now are starting to sound very similar because there's only so many note combinations and chord progressions that you can create without things sounding similar. So do you think it's a possibility that language can only create so many sounds before it starts sounding similar, or is it that they all come from a base?
Well, I mean, that sounds like the same thing.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yes and yes, I think, if that makes any sense, because I do think there's a limit to how many sounds there are made,
especially when you look at
the language.
Polar opposites, say like Japanese or say Chinese and English, two very different language families, and you can have the same sound like a ch, but they can mean very different things in each language. Like that's the same sound, but meanings can be different. That's the only thing I have to entertain when thinking about sounds like, looks like, is like. That's the only thing I have to keep my skeptical lens on, just to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable at the same time.
I think where I'm at right now, the only thing I could hypothetically say, if I were to try to frame that from the Bock Saga, I would say it goes back to the Tower of Babel and the confusing of tongues, right? Mm-hmm. There's a reason why these sounds are the same, but they mean different things to different people. Meanwhile, we're starting to realize that regardless of where it is and which story's right and wrong, we come from a common family. We are one family. I've been working with this idea of the family feud, the endless family feud. And I think it's an ideological one for sure. Maybe that ties into black hats and white hats,
Well, it's a perfect way to keep us separated and arguing, isn't it? We're all making the same sound, but we've got different ideas of what it means.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you demonize a lot of words too. I mean, we talked about that already. It's even this itself is a very controversial topic just on that alone, that we're kind of, we're saying we already have a connotation attached to angel, right? And if I'm saying it's a human, then that's extremely offensive, right? But it's only because of the connotation we've been given. That's the problem. And we need to take back our experiences, and we can still keep these words. But even the word elven goes back all the way. You trace the etymology, it goes back and it means white. It's nuts. It's everywhere. It's crazy. That's what I gotta say. It's just crazy, man. And it's not the only view. I know it's not the only view, but that's where I'm at right now, because I'm trying to see that they've tried to hide history, and they try to fuck up all of our spiritual experiences, right? Right? why not get two birds stoned at once, man? This is the best way. You remove history by fictionalizing it, and you take the fiction and you use it as gatekeeping for all of our spiritual experiences.
I'm sure you're like,
right to me.
I'm sure you're like a lot of other people where you see things that have happened in the world and the symbolism that's everywhere. How you do see a lot of that satanic symbolism, but like you said at the start, that a lot of that symbolism you can draw back to Bock Saga. Do you think this has been co-opted and inverted for a reason?
Yes. And it's not always for negative reasons either. A lot of times it was to hide. I think we forget that too, that inversion sometimes is like to hide in plain sight, not just for bad guys. Yeah. But then again, I'm not supposing good or bad or evil or anything like that. This story kind of reframes good and evil, because a lot of the words that we even have that relate to evil, at least according to the Bock Saga, painted as a very like mundane word or term or something that doesn't add up. Even their story, it's pretty funny about devil. They claim that it's literally saying the wheel, and the wheel supposedly is a swastika that's spinning.
Yeah, it's a sundial.
Yeah.
The black sun that helps tell us when to crop and when to farm.
And that. Yep. And so it's when you do that suddenly, and it's funny too, because it's so hard to like keep that all in mind while you're following all these other conspiratorial lines that end in satanic this and satanic that. It's like, it's so great that they're so genius. They just wanted to like hide underneath words that aren't true to them. You know, it's so bizarre. So weird, man. Especially
in the world today, that I'm only mentioning this because I saw it on the news. I know, right? Watching the news, what an idiot. So there's a story, like my state is pretty hard on anti-Semitic, any kind of talk, hate speech.
Oh, of course.
But we've also got Nazi symbolism laws now in Victoria, and New South Wales, a state above me, where if you have any Nazi symbols depicted, it's like $11,000 fine and time in prison. And the symbols aren't Nazi symbols. They are co-opted symbols of an ancient past. And because they've brought these laws in, you can't even delve into what the history of the world really is because of fear of prosecution and to be labelled as a right-wing extremist. Like, that's the biggest pointer for me, that there's something to this and something is deliberately being hidden from us. Otherwise, why would they go to such efforts to hide it?
Right, exactly. And imagine how controversial a show on the History Channel would be if it was called Ancient Aryans.
Exactly. That's why they had to create the term Proto-Europeans in its place.
Right. Yeah. It's unreal, man. So where would you like to go? Oh, do you want me to play a little bit of that Jim piece?
That'd be good.
Thing? Okay, cool. I don't remember how long it is. I posted it on Instagram a while back, but let's see. Share screen. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing. We'll have to turn it back on. You know what's funny?
Is it on now?
Oh, am I good? Am I good? Yes. Sweet.
Yes, cool.
All right, cool.
How could I not have the deep share something? That'd be just offensive.
All right, are you seeing my Instagram here?
Yeah. Has started. There we go. It's up now. Cool.
Okay, let's see if I can. Do you hear that?
Yep.
Back to where Helsinki is today, the new name for hell. And there they start to live, and they start to create one new article race of people, which spread out over Russia. So the Finnish people and the Russian people, they're exact same people. They spoke Finnish language until 800 years ago. But something happened in the family. Sometimes when they were trying to make many, many children quickly, they had more than 12 sons. And these more than 12 sons could be ambassadors. They could be information people going out. But in this case, two of these brothers, the 13th and 14th son, they had no title in the family because it was only the 12 sons that had the title. So these two brothers, these two kings, they wanted to become kings. So they decided not to go back to Finland, not to go back to hell, to be part of this Oscar system there. And one of these brothers was called Don, and one was called Sven. And they were two kings. They were the V kings. And these two brothers, one, Sven, he goes to Uppsala, where Uppsala, Sweden is today. And there he makes his capital. And he starts one article race of person there. And from his seed, from the seed of Sven, comes the Norwegians, the Icelandic, the Greenland people, the Scottish people, and the Irish people. They come from the seed of this Swedish king. Don, the other brother, the other of the two brothers, he goes down to Denmark. He makes the mark of Don, and mark means land, so the land of Don. And this Don, from his seed, comes two kings in Germany. I think their name is Gottrip and Brandenburg. And these first two seeds is Brandenburg is where Berlin is, and this Gottrip, I think, is where the Lübeck is. I could be mistaken on this, but I put this in. But anyway, the king line of Germany or Saxon, they're coming from the Danish, from his seed. And from this German and from this Danish, from this source story comes the Austrian, the Swiss, the Dutch, the Holland people, the Belgian people, the English people. So the English is a different race than the Scottish and the Irish. They are another race. They're from the Sven line, whereas England is coming from the Dan line, all the way down to France. So all this Western Europe is coming out from the seed of the Dan.
Well, there you go.
Vikings, these first two
That lines up exactly with, like, very closely with what you would see in the transplanting of different peoples across Western Europe.
There's 10 tropical races. The oldest white race is the Finnish and the Russians. These are the original white people on the planet. The second and third white people is the Dan, the Danish, and the Swedish. And this is his Gotland story. It's probably more to it, but anyway, this is where they came.
It looks like we're having technical difficulties again.
Oh no!
Oh, there we go. Better. There we go.
We're back. Okay. Yep. Yeah. Well. Yeah. I think you got plenty of it.
I got the idea. Yeah. Yeah. That lines up a lot with what you see with Robert Zeppe's work as well. That you have in Robert Zeppe's work, it's more a single source, but this lines up more with the phonetic differences, like how you see Finnish is so distinctly different from other Norse languages, and it has a lot of time what you consider Slavic.
Yes,
but looks like, according to this, that Slavic came from that initially, which does make a lot of sense, especially the way you see its language now. And definitely you see that the English are a very different group of people compared to those in Britain. They're a subplant. They've come from the Angles and the Saxons. So they're a Germanic root people, whereas the rest of them are Celtic or Pictish in nature. So it does hit a lot of those main ideas you see replicated in what you consider mainstream history.
And this is just a small example. So this is a very oral story, like I said, and the continuation of it and the telling of it all and putting history together under this umbrella is all on the internet. And it's just thousands of hours of interviews and lectures and, people talking together about these things. A lot of it goes back to like VHS, and it's really, grimy to watch. It's insane how detailed it is. And it covers so much ground that it's really kind of almost offensive to suggest that this Eeyore Bock just made it all up. I mean, maybe he twisted some of it. Maybe he made some of it his own. I don't know. When I talk to Yoke, who has the language, I don't. He fights against that. He has his reasons. He has a lot of logical reasons and explanations for things that, many kind of gloss over or just haven't heard yet. This is new. This is really new and fresh. And even though it came out in 1984, it's still fresh because it hasn't gotten the coverage it needs. And now I think it really is now. And it's interesting that even a very sacred site to the Bockists, the people involved with this, is under threat of being, the bank has basically, recalled their loan or something like that. They need the money now, so they had to sell, and it's crazy. It's a whole other part of it. It's nuts. Where we do have possible evidence or could have evidence, it's slowly been they've been trying to take it away and not be able to give us access. It's interesting. That's a whole nother thing, but we can get into it.
Yeah, we could keep going down this for hours and hours. I think the important thing is that remain skeptical, because that's probably a great way to be looking into anything. Still entertain the idea, have a look at it.
Yes.
I think the biggest things that I find are a challenge to me at the moment, and I'll admit it, that Bock Saga hits on so many topics and so many areas for me. It seems too good to be true at this point. But at the same time, right. that's what makes me want to keep looking into it.
That's what you have to do, right? I mean, so that's how all of them end, right? It's too good to be true, and then you find something that you have to just throw it all away or something. But yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I want more debate, more. And the thing is, I've had a couple, not full blown debates, but at least debatable questions or, conversations about certain aspects. And unfortunately, they're not satisfying. They have not satisfied the questioning. It's either, oh man, yeah. So
I think that's a problem though. When we try to debate things like this, it's probably not something that should be debated, more so just discussed, because it's just answering questions with questions. And I don't think on either side of anything, you don't really have a lot of settled information. It's settled to you to a certain point, but is anything really the truth anymore?
That's fair. That's fair. I guess what I'm getting at, and I'll give you a great example, is that Michael Tessarian talked about this recently with Yoke, actually. And I'm not sure if he was talking directly about my show or our show that we've done, or just in general, people talking about the Bock Saga, that those who discredit it or try to discredit it always use established history to discredit it. And he gets real fiery about what are you talking about? You're using the exact strategy that they're using to hide everything from us to explain this away. It's pretty intense.
Sounds like a flat earth type of debate, doesn't it?
A little bit, yeah, in a way.
Like using established science to prove something that, we all know that there's lies and everything. So
right.
I get where you're coming from. It's how can you use something that we know has been lied about and exposed multiple times as an argument? It's a very hard place to navigate. So more power to you to try and do that.
The most important one there is the third Ragnarok. There's 3 Ragnaroks. The third one is by human hands. It's when the Catholics supposedly annihilate all these original heathen people. And, the heathens there's a couple of them that escape and have to live in hiding. And of course, the Da Vinci Code hijacked that whole concept. And, they bury the treasure, and supposedly we're opening it now in Finland, or trying to. But, the Catholics come in and destroy everything. And supposedly that's where a lot of history got changed, and a lot of repression happened. So it's like, how do you trust something that we already know has been completely annihilated to begin with? This could be just one little keystone in a group of keystones that can lead us back to what was really going on before everything was hijacked. Maybe not. Some would say, oh, this is just the pagans trying to, Satan. It's just, what side of the fence are you on? I choose not to be on either, and just try to see it all from as objective standpoint as I can.
Yeah, and I can't blame people for jumping on it's Satanism bandwagon, because a lot of evil shit's happening with that symbolism. So
absolutely, and it could
twice burnt, once shy. Like,
I'll say it right now. Like, I don't think anyone that's alive today that is investigating or was close to Eeyore or anything is bad or negative. They're amazing people, and they've come forward with so much information. Heathens and pagans are not bad people, but there is so much of that coming back, right? And it's framed as evil, and some of it seems really fucking Luciferian and evil and all that. So I think, again, we have this, they often like to use human shields. That's how they operate, these fucking cowardice, reptilian, disgusting people. That's how they operate. They use the truth against us all the time. They twist real stories against us. They invert everything. It's a constant thing. But this could be, no matter what, if the Bock Saga is true, all the evil fucks in charge have some role in that origin story too. And where we come from as a group of white people that also, admittedly so, in this Bock Saga, along with many other, primordial tribes around the planet, they were very keep it in the family, keep it in the culture. They were, alien was the other people in the, so I think there's a lot of the Aryan race and where the Nazis went with it and everything. There is a hint of what this survival culture was doing back then in keeping it all in the system they had it, and everybody mated with the right person and all that. So I think the evil and the good are rooted in our past. And it's really just happenstance that we have it's set up the way we do now. And I think this archaic revival that's obviously coming back is good and evil. It's both.
Yeah, it's the person wielding it or their understanding
Absolutely.
of it that depicts what happens.
Damn right.
I'd really love to sit down with you and maybe some of the other guys someday and really dissect what the First Nations people in Australia had to say about their creation and see if we can find any interconnectedness or things like that. That'd be, I think,
Absolutely.
really important to look at.
I think that would be wonderful, man. I've done it with like a couple different areas of the world so far, and I'm not done with those. It's just, there's more and more and more the more you look into primary source material. It's unreal.
Yeah. All right. To close out our show, Andy, can you help the viewers out? This is something I always like to do. What is the point of Bock Saga to you?
Point of Bock Saga to me is the rediscovery of how simple things were and how simple and to the point everything is. Occam's razor, basically. And again, rehumanizing antiquity, that taking back all the power, not just some of it, all of it.
Because ancient astronaut theorists say yes. That's the problem now. That series.
I'm not saying it's aliens.
Everything gets blamed on aliens now. But you're right. There's nothing wrong with simple either. Simple is good. Simple is the way things are supposed to be. It's not meant to be complicated in the way we look and engage in our world. All right, Andy.
I think the complication is on purpose, right?
Definitely. Where can people find you, Andy?
They could find me on YouTube and Rockfin and Odyssey and all the podcast apps and social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I'm just the Deep Share on most of them. So that's where you'll find me. The Deep Share podcast.
Fantastic.
Thank
Before we
so
jump
much,
out,
man. This has been really great.
Awesome. Before we jump out, put a message out to the listeners. I still don't have an intro for my show. I'm 11 episodes in now, just over a year. So I need some help from you guys. If you're someone who's talented in music and can help me out with an intro, it could be a song, it could be a mashup of sound recordings, whatever. If you've got something to help me out, send it my way. It'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks again for joining me today, Andy. I look forward to seeing your research in the future, like you're really delving deep, and I wouldn't be all surprised if you come out with a documentary and a book someday, and I can't wait to get a signed copy.
Oh, cool. That'd be awesome. Who knows? Maybe I'll be that ambitious someday. Thanks again for having me on, brother. I love this talk. This was great.
Anytime, mate. You're welcome back. Open invitation.
Hell yeah, man. Likewise.
All right. See everybody.
Become a part of the Horton team. We're looking for welders, painters, assemblers, machine operators, cabinet makers, and other positions to build emergency vehicles that help save lives. Join us at our hiring event on Wednesday, January 18th from 2 to 5 p.m. at 3800 McDowell Road in Grove City. We offer a huge $1,500 sign-on bonus and great benefits such as 401k match, medical coverage starting day one, and much more. For more information on what Horton can do for you, visit careers.revgroup.com and search Grove City.